Welcome to Unit 5 on close reading and text complexity. I first remember this term text complexity back in graduate school when we discussed appropriate levels of books to use with students, but I didn't quite understand the confines of it in its full entirety. And so looking at it in terms of the texts that we try to use for our students in classes, are they too difficult? And if so, what can we do to help students still read and peruse these texts with success, bringing in their prior knowledge and experiences to that reading experience? So what has changed in the standards that reflect both text complexity and close reading as a whole? And we really have to look back at how text complexity has changed from the No Child Left Behind to the Common Core, especially in the primary grades, because now the Common Core state standards focuses on mastery, meaning few things but in depth as opposed to the breadth. So the students across grade levels will compare and synthesize ideas, interact in academic discussions, they'll write after their reading, they'll use research and digital literacies to conduct inquiries, and they'll participate in multiple readings of texts. So the Common Core assessments include the following standards that we must meet. The first is governing reading standards. Furthermore, producing claims, broad statements of the learning outcomes that are to be assessed. And of the 4 English language art literacy claims, the first is that students can read closely and analytically to comprehend a range of increasingly complex literary and informational texts. And reflecting on my own high school experiences, I know that I struggled with some of the classics like Shakespeare and Beowulf, but others struggled or had successes in nonfiction science or biology and history. So I want you to think about your own. Were you able to more successfully comprehend narrative texts or content and disciplinary reading? We tend to gravitate towards some things rather than others. Also, the amount of reading. Sometimes a lot, quantity matters, other times quality matters. And are the texts that were selected too difficult, and how can you connect to it, if at all? So again, we're drawn to different types of content and interested thereof. So what has never changed? Well, first of all, when it comes to reading comprehension and analytical reasoning, these have always been key core constructs to performing highly in school, particularly on standardized tests such as the SAT and ACT. Having knowledge of content doesn't necessarily matter in these tests because we know that they're all based upon reading passages and answering multiple test questions afterwards. So essentially, voracious readers are going to regularly score the highest on these tests because of their vocabulary knowledge and their abilities to comprehend what they read, meaning they're well read across many genres, types of texts, and so that they're inherently able to navigate no matter what comes through on those tests. So let's think about, how do we define close reading? Well, the answer to that is really around reading closely to determine what the text says explicitly through multiple readings of a text. So for example, a reader in the first text might look at what is the outline or the main idea, or what is the author trying to say, whereas the teacher might assign a second reading later in the week to look at the syntax being used or the tone and the voice that the author is trying to use to provoke the reader and to relay those messages or the details. And maybe even a third read about how do we look at the inherent conflicts between the protagonist and the antagonist in the story. So these could also be done with movies and videos, and not necessarily just the same reading of that printed text. They often occur in digital spaces as well. So think about examples of movies that you've rewatched to gain a better understanding of. Maybe it's The Matrix or Inception, and those things that pique our curiosities. An example that we're going to look at today is The Letter from a Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King Jr. And this is one of those letters that might yield multiple interpretations depending on your background experiences, depending on where you're from as well. And so these interpretations might vary widely away from what Dr. King's original message was. So let's have a look. It is true that the police have exercised a degree of discipline in handling the demonstrators. In this sense, they have conducted themselves rather nonviolently in public. But for what purpose? to preserve the evil system of segregation? Over the past few years, I have consistently preached that nonviolence demands that the means we use must be as pure as the ends we seek. I have tried to make clear that it is wrong to use immoral means to attain moral ends. But now I must affirm that it is just as wrong, or perhaps even more so, to use moral means to preserve immoral ends. Perhaps Mr. Connor and his policemen have been rather nonviolent in public, as was Chief Pritchard in Albany, Georgia. But they have used the moral means of nonviolence to maintain the immoral end of racial injustice. As T.S. Eliot has said, the last temptation is the greatest treason, to do the right deed for the wrong reason. So my first reaction is, wow, that has such a powerful message and its complexity is rich. And so this is the type of passage or reading that would warrant multiple readings so that you could dig deeper in and not just look at its message at the surface level. An alternative idea that could be linked to multiple readings or close readings is to vary the pace at which you read. So if we think about if we typically reread a book, we probably read at the same pace we read the first time. But I had an idea. What if we more or less read, 1.5 or twice as fast the first reading, meaning planting those seeds of the information to come. And then in the second reading, we read at half the speed as normal, meaning we wouldn't take any different a time to have those two readings, but we would plant the seeds in the first sort of speed reading, if you will, and in the second reading, we would try to go and fill in the gaps of information, looking at particular aspects of the reading that were not so clear in our first read. And I think this sort of idea of read fast, read slow would ensure that the students are paying close attention to what they don't already fully understand. Text complexity really does matter. Being able to read complex text independently and proficiently is essential for higher achievement in college and career workplace. So over the last 50 years, according to the Common Core State Standards, the complexity of college and workplace reading has increased, while the text complexities used in schools has remained stagnant. And further, College Board, the makers of the SAT, found that college professors assign more readings from periodicals than do high school teachers, rather. So if we go through thinking about, let's say, applications for student loans, this is written at about the 12th or 13th grade level. Or college textbooks, again, right around that level. But what about things like W-4 forms? Again, written at the college level, but not everyone has gone to college or reads at that level. Does that create a problem? I think it does. Or even CD or DVD information. Even the Wall Street Journal is written well within the college range. And then other texts such as Where the Wild Things Are and even Grapes of Wrath are written around the middle school years, even though they're typically used in high school. So again, the text, the readability of a text really does matter in terms of, is this appropriately written for its target audience? Another reason why text complexity matters is that oftentimes those workplace requirements exceed what the level at which the workforce employees enter into that domain. So, for example, in architecture, if we think about carpenters, or we think about agricultural business assistants and so on, these people have to be able to effectively read at different Lexile measures, at different grade levels. And oftentimes, I think when people are in different disciplines such as science or business, they don't oftentimes think that they have to have reading and writing proficiency. Furthermore, hospitality workers or public safety, law enforcement, even scientific researchers are oftentimes not ready for those requirements in ELA. So how do we define text complexity? Well, the first way to do so is quantitatively, meaning that the word length, the word frequency, the sentence length, and the text cohesion matter within an overall sentence and paragraph structure. So that meaning the longer the sentences and the more multisyllabic words used within this paragraph or this 100-word piece, the greater the text complexity is measured. So here are some equivalents for Lexiles aligned to new standards, and then the grade level bands in accordance. Some other readability formulas are freely available online. You can go to these websites, but there's also one built into the MS Word, Microsoft Word program itself. So it has a opportunity for you to go into properties, go into spelling and grammar check, and then you can click Run Readability Statistics. And you can highlight a passage or import a digital website link or an article that you found, and you can determine what readability and if it's suitable for your students. Again, this is not a perfect science because there are other components qualitatively that factor into a text complexity. And these include the meaning or the purpose, right? The knowledge demands. Does a student already know about that topic? If it's on photosynthesis, or if it's on a new discovery of a new planet and so on, if that's somebody's field of expertise, and they're going to navigate that text to a greater extent because they bring that background knowledge to the actual reading. The structure of the piece, are they familiar with the text structure? Is it in a digital or print environment? What kinds of captions and figures and tables and so on have they already had success in those text structures? And even genre matters too. So finally, the language and the conventionality and clarity in which these pieces are written also play a part in the text's overall complexity. So there are many states that are developing rubrics that teachers can use to evaluate these qualitative measures, such as the state of Missouri. And I encourage you to seek out your own district to see how they combat issues of text complexity and how they use close reading in order to ensure students have success with reading across the disciplines.